Funding for Discovery Road brought to you in part by the National Park Service.
Well, here it is, a gritty patch of dirt on a windswept plain in central Utah, where young Jewish families a very long time ago tilled their dreams for a new beginning. Yes, indeed, this is the place where utopia came calling.
It all got started back east in the big cities. That's where the quash of life germinated into a search for something better, a utopia, a paradise. In the early 1900s, somewhere near here in what is now Gunnison, Utah, a handful of Jewish families staked their claim to the future, part of the Back to the Land movement. Escaping sweatshops, crowded cities, and poverty, they sought opportunity and a better way of life. They cleared land, planted wheat, alfalfa, and oats, and gave birth to Clarion, Utah. But conditions were rough on the newcomers. Dust, wind, a scarcity of water, a broken cistern, eventually crumbling dreams. What you're seeing here is one of the most important things humans do. They're searching, looking for themselves, really, trying to find their family story. Anna Eroff was there. So was her father. They were among the busloads of people who arrived on the 100th anniversary of Clarion. 2 generations, descendants of Clarion, 2 important treatments of the Clarion recital.
It's the 100th year anniversary of the settlement of Clarion, Utah, which where my father was born and my grandfather was one of the original settlers. I think history and family in the context of, immigrants coming to America and finding their own American story, I was always intrigued by the fact that, my father's American story started on what might be called a kibbutz or a communal living, outside of Salt Lake City, which is how it was described to me, in a valley. We're Americans. We've been here for 100 years or more, and this is, part of my American story.
Well, I've for years been really fascinated by the idea of a utopia and sort of the idea that I came from people who up and left and wanted to make a better life. I heard when I was a kid, my grandfather grew up in a commune. And that to me was awesome. When I started to be really reading about utopian movement and thinking about how do I make a change in this world and make a better life for myself and my future, I started to look to my family history.
We wondered, why would people come back here to see failure? The answer, just down the road where it all started. So a journey got underway, a busload of anticipation. A caravan of families passing lush fields of farmland. There was even one man on a bicycle on the way to the past. An impolite wind didn't keep these descendants from sharing their family stories, taking some photos, connecting with their ancestors.
My grandparents came out here. My grandfather was in the first group. Yeah, my father was about 5 years old, but my father didn't talk about it at all. And
how long did they move back to New York shortly after?
Not shortly after, no, they were here for quite a while. My grandmother was not thrilled about being here.
Yeah, nor was my grandmother. We were just saying that when my grandmother was here, and it was very, very difficult. She was mourning still the death of her 4-year-old in New York.
Yeah.
She had 3 little ones, and she was pregnant with the 4th. The drought or the flood or whatever it was, yeah.
There was still one more arrival to the Clarion site.
Just this whole feeling of going back to the land is such a powerful thing, and to hear about people who did this 100 years ago, to me, has a lot of resonance. If you observe strict Jewish laws on Shabbat, there's the idea of radical rest, including not riding in cars or lighting fires as you would in a gasoline engine or handling money. So I don't ride in cars, but if I was very strict, I wouldn't ride a bicycle either, but I compromise.
Clarion, Utah might have failed as a colony, but under the soft clouds, steep beneath the hard clay, life lessons and gifts to humanity. Los Angeles is home to Anna Eroff, but she's been drawn to Utah by her family roots in Clarion. And when she can, she visits. The quieting open road, a respite. Her photos, a discourse on the journey, hers and theirs.
I came here with my dad and took photos of the ruins and was looking at the ruins and sort of trying to figure out the ways in which I could give life back, give that utopian hope back to what remains of Clarion.
It took more than a century, but there it was, right on the corner of Main Street in Gunnison, Utah. Speeches, music, and celebration of the Clarion story for all to see, and interpretive kiosk panels, a permanent reminder of the important story, placing Jews prominently on the western landscape of America. Descendants were proud.
The state of Utah makes such a big thing out of the Mormon pioneers, but we feel that our grandparents and the families that came from New York had just as hard of struggles, and we don't know honestly how they ever ate and fed their families. It was just such dire circumstances. But they survived it, and their 5 children had gone on to be successful and good citizens and made a life for their children here in the United States. So we just feel that it's important that our children and our grandchildren and our upcoming posterity remember and know where the roots were and what happened here.
I came today because my grandparents, Rebecca and Samuel Crystal, immigrated to the Clarion Jewish colony, farming colony, in 1913 with their young son Benjamin, and in 1915 my mother was born here, Clara Crystal, and May Crystal was born here, and Meyer Crystal were born here, 3 other siblings.
Well, it's important to me and the people in our family where we want to know about our parents' heritage. We want to know where they were born. We want to know the experiences of their life, because the more you know about that, the more you can understand your parents and what they went through and why they're the people they are. And also, it affected my dad because he ended up in the produce business. They they came here, they tried to farm. Well, my uncle who stayed here was in the trucking business, and he was just related to farming. My dad was in the produce business related to farming, so this had a definite effect on him.
Bob Goldberg had a lot to do with this notable day of history in the state of Utah. His book, Back to the Soil, revealed the history, the story, and the people of Clarion like never before.
What is a key piece of this story is the coming together of 2 peoples, Jews and Mormons. They came together in 1911 and 1912 where Jewish farmers needed help. They were absolutely inexperienced. They were from the cities. And Mormon farmers came out and helped and shared their expertise with the Jews. And that example of cooperation has been carried on for 100 years since. It occurred during the reunion. It occurred when the kiosks were created. But 2 people reaching together, holding hands to move a piece of this territory, this hinterland, forward. And it's got to be admired.
Jerry Klinger is the president of the Jewish-American Society for historic preservation, he knows recognition in the public square is important.
Again, in the middle, at the top over there, you see the two letters, Ponifta. Or this is basically where he's resting. Here you see in the English, his name was Edward H., who was the son of Sam and Rose Lieberman. His actual name was Yitzchak Tzvi ben Shlomo, or Shalom. And then it says who died in the early days of his life.
And out here on the prairie, Jerry Klinger knows the power of an important story.
Well, the folks that came here with hope and belief, and they could only come here for one reason, and that was that the America offered them that opportunity. A lot of cultures, a lot of countries, Jews were not permitted to have land. They had the freedom to express themselves. They came here with a dream. Not all dreams work out. There's no guarantee in our society that your dreams must work out. But the guarantee is you have the opportunity to try and reach for them. And they did. In their case, it didn't work as well. And they lost a few members of their community. But we still remember them and still honor what they were trying to do as Americans.
And then, a touching lesson in history and humility.
In Jewish tradition, when we visit a gravesite, we try and put a small stone to honor the individual and one to remember. Because again, in our tradition, it is our obligation to bury the individual. We don't ask anybody else to do it. So it's as if you're adding the mitzvahs, we would say, or the good deed of helping someone who can't help you in any way whatsoever. You want to give them the final respect of helping to their resting place should be secure.
Over there, in the distance, is another story you can find only in Clarion. Standing there at attention, a lone figure, a farmer who grew up in these parts and learned early about the struggle on the soil, even though he wasn't a part of it.
And I was sitting there in the truck and I said, "What's that white thing over there?" And he said, "Oh, that's the Jewish graves, And so ever since then, I've been fascinated with it. Usually I'll come out, to the farm and I can tell if somebody's lost for like a couple miles away, they're trolling back and forth on the roads. And so I usually go out there and ask them if they need some help. And usually they're looking for the Jewish colony. So I take them and show them around, and they're really grateful, they're really in awe of how the people went through all the hardships they did to make Clarion what it was, and just works out good for everybody, and I've surely enjoyed it.
Sorensen is a door greeter to this open-air page of dusty history. His grandparents, and then his parents, did all they could to lend dignity to the site before it was widely appreciated as a place of significance. They served as unofficial tour guides when visitors would stop by, when people would wander and wonder, what happened here?
I enjoy helping people finding their ancestors because it means a lot to them, and it makes me feel good when I can see how happy they are, and then they write me back letters and stuff, and I really appreciate it. And that's the way the world should be, help each other, no matter what religion you are.
Bruce Sorensen carrying Bob Goldberg's Back to the Soil book. It's his Friends of Clarion diary with signatures, best wishes, and thoughts about life out here on the soil.
I just wanted to say thanks for you taking the time to show me the Jewish neighborhood. While my ancestors returned to the eastern cities they had left, the promise of a Utah blossom really did come to pass, thanks to men who were better caretakers of the soil. Bruce, I especially want to say thanks to you for all the things you do to keep the heritage alive. This land is in good hands, no great hands. You bring a dignity to the profession can only be admired by guys like me who have never farmed. It can't be easy, but it must be worth it. Thanks for taking the time in your day to share with me such a cherished time. Many thanks, Bob Basso, who was a communications professor back in Kansas.
Even while tending to alfalfa, hay, fields of onions and other crops, Bruce Sorensen always keeps an eye on the dirt roads, just in case another cloud puffs up, telling of a visitor. The unassuming sign is right there, telling you you're on Clarion Road. That's where you'll find a successful and productive farm operation. Lots and lots of milk cows, tractors, one very big dog, and a friendly host in Tanya Otten. Welcome to the Otten Family Dairy.
That pivot that you see running out there is covers part of the acreage that the Jewish people actually farmed. When we prepared that field for the very first time for planting, we were able to see some of the evidence that that was a Jewish farm field. And you can see the difference between what it looks like with water and what it looks like without water, because at one time all of that was prepared into fields for cultivation by the Jewish people.
Massive sprinkler systems delivering water where it is needed, and technology moving the equipment, heavy equipment, inch by inch over the crops. It shows a much different world than what the Jewish families faced.
In 1911, when Clarion was settled, the irrigation technology was just so much different than it is now, and it has made it so that we have a prosperous dairy farm with plenty of water to go on the land that we need for our crops, whereas back then there were just so many challenges for them with flood irrigation and the ability that they had to hold the water and to deliver the water to their actual farms. It made it a challenge for them.
The Paiute Canal, holding precious water necessary to sustain everything, was the last stop on our tour. Seeing the water, lots of water, and hearing the water. And then birds, bird songs, all around the canal. A fitting salute to a Clarion day. One of the more intriguing stories born from colonists who left Clarion is inside this old photo of a fruit stand. It involves not failed crops, but fresh produce. When Clarion failed, most settlers returned to the east coast of America, some to California, but a few stayed in Utah, including a young boy named Maurice Warshaw. His family had fled persecution in Russia. They left sweatshops in Philadelphia. They tried Clarion. Then they tried Salt Lake City. Young Maurice scraped together a living in Salt Lake, first by peddling junk, the low end of the social order. Then he worked his way up to a food cart. Apples, oranges, the best produce he could get his hands on. And it worked. Eventually, he started his own store, Grand Central Market, and then another store, which grew into Grand Central Stores, a chain of stores in several states. Oh yes, another very important point. He married a Mormon girl. He went on to amass a fortune, make a name for himself, and in the Utah State Capitol, among statues and busts of other great leaders, you find Maurice Warshaw. It's all in his book, aptly titled, Life, More Sweet Than Bitter.
He always had, I think, a respect for all people, but he viewed life realistically, realizing that there was a great deal of sorrow and strife and sadness. There were many people throughout the world who were without, and I think he was very in tune to that. And because of that, I think that's the reason he titled the book the way he did.
Maurice was always proud of what he had done for the retail field. I think he was very generous in the way that he did it, and he was very, by the way, very competitive. He worked very hard, and he was very successful. But as success came to Maurice, he also shared.
He cared deeply about people worldwide. When he was working for CARE and UNICEF, boy, if there was a famine, there was pestilence, flood, he would be there leading him with relief. And I remember so many evenings after he'd made these trips, he would come back and show us movies of the good they were doing in different countries. And, you know, we're all in this together in the world. And he was truly a world citizen.
Well, he definitely didn't ever want you to give up. That is one thing Maurice would always tell us, is to just do it, to be it, and to say it. He was never one that you ever would try to guess what he was thinking or guess what he was wanting. He was very direct, but kind and gentle and humorous.
On the 100th anniversary of Clarion, Maurice Warshaw's family was there.
We did take a bus down to Clarion, and my husband came along as well. It's a wonderful place. It's a sad place when I think about it, but I'm really proud of the people that went there and went on to build better lives and become successful. And I just think it's kind of helped make my grandfather, or the beginning of the making of the man, Maurice Warshaw.
The humble beginnings of that old photograph are not forgotten. They're right there on the living room wall and distilled in his family. Constant reminders that yes, life more sweet than bitter.
I feel like a Jew in Utah. Keep digging, my elder brothers.
The journey to Clarion is always interesting. On this day, a film crew making a movie about Clarion. Another view of the incredible story.
The Mormons are a part of the lost tribes of Israel, and so the movie kind of plays on that idea, and it ends up being, in the end, that this character, the lone Jew, the fear that he has of the Mormon community it's all in his mind, and he learns that there were Jews here before him. That's in a nutshell sort of the basic idea of the movie. So I guess to me, coming to this sort of desolate place that was once something and isn't what it used to be, and maybe wasn't what anybody thought it was going to be in the first place, is right on par with what our movie is about, and I think the human experience as far as I've experienced it.
Movies on the big screen have a power for telling a story, and few have done it better than Schindler's List. Gerald Mullen won an Academy Award producing it. He talked with Discovery Road about the Clarion story.
If we think about what they went through, it would probably be no different than the Mormons when they went looking for not so much their utopia, but a place where they could live in peace and thrive and prosper with their families. They tried. My hat's off to them for having tried. Any people that are going through hard times, maybe think that they where they're at in their life is their so-called utopia, and in realizing that it's not. And so they reach out and they take one more step, one more try, one more effort at making the life right, not just for them, but for their families. And I think that in their particular case, I think it's all about family and how they can make things better for them.
It's been more than a century since any attempts were made to colonize this lonely, dusty, sprawling prairie. Now it's just a big empty. Really, there's not much out here, unless you're looking for paradise. I'm James Nelson. We'll see you next time, out here on Discovery Road.
Clarion, Utah, 3 miles from Gunnison, Utah, in the middle of nowhere, on barren land, but a place where dreams were made.